I guess we'll call this a letter. A series of questions. Tell me, what does the American flag look like when it's not choking you? Tell me, what do hands look like when you're not caged in? Tell me, what does it look like when you're not a Muslim in America? Tell me, when the adhan does not sound like a curse? Tell me, when the adhan does not sound like a curse from a white man in a pedestal? Now tell me, what happens when Iqamat Salat turns into a death sentence? What happens when Al-Fatiha turns into the opening of my own coffin? What happens when Surah Al-Baqarah becomes 10 lines too long? What happens when Surah Al-Baqarah becomes 100 lines too long? What happens when Surah Al-Baqarah does not exist to America? When the Quran is just something to quote out of when we decide we want to be diverse? What happens when the Bible gets too old? What happens when the Quran becomes something to be displayed and not to be read? Something to be looked at in a museum and not to be observed? What happens when Islam becomes a candy? What happens when Islam becomes edible? What happens when it becomes something you can chew up and spit out on a lower Manhattan street? What happens when Islam can be glorified by an Uzbeki man and then demonized by the same man in the same sentence? Allahu Akbar is the sentence he uses to sentence 4 people to death. And maybe I'm wrong about the body count. And maybe it was only 2 people. But how many lives does it take to actually sentence a Muslim to death? And the answer is none. Because before I was born, my mother already knew what my coffin would look like. And she wasn't even Muslim then. But my father still knew the way it would sound when I would have a bullet enter my chest, and I've been close to that moment 3 too many times. And so oftentimes I ask non-Muslims a question. What would it take for you to give me the shirt off your back? What would it take for you to give me your life? What would it take to breathe something into a religion you do not believe in? What would it take to break something in 2 just to share it with me? And this, I tell them, is the only lesson I have learned honestly from Islam. I mean, the last time I held my hands in prayer was the first time I was in handcuffs. And so I guess I'm a secular Muslim if I only pray when I am hurting or occupied or in prison, but I've always been like this. So I guess I am a religious Muslim. To be constantly chained up, to never know freedom. Islam, I think, is sometimes a prisoner's religion. Something to be caged in, with no air left to breathe. Something you can't even whisper.